Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Welcome to the Intentional Product Manager podcast. So with me today, the guest is Satyajeet Salgar. So Satyajeet leads product management, UX and UX research for a applied AI team in Google Research that pushes bleeding edge cross-disciplinary machine learning capabilities. And he works across transformative products from across Google, from search, YouTube, cloud, etc. He previously worked at YouTube Shopping and was also leading the product team responsible for Google Discover feed experiences and on Google Search responsible for media. Now, Satyajit and I might debate which is the best business school in Chicago since we went to different ones, but that's a separate topic. Satyajit, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So I'm going to jump in right with questions that people would be dying to ask you. So, so many people who I work with or who are on the podcast, they really want to know about Google and product management roles there. So tell me, what does it take to succeed as a product leader at Google?
I think product management is an amazing sort of career. And I think Google is, in many ways, I think you have to enjoy product and sort of, be successful. You have to do the things that many good PMs have to do. I think there's big company PMing, which adds a couple of other dimensions on top of being a good PM, where it's slightly different. Then I think there's things specific to Google. So I think the things that generally matter are just good product instincts. Are you able to make good decisions for the product team? Are you able to define a strategy? Do you have intuition? Do you have great product intuition, right? I think that matters everywhere, no matter what. I think there's an element at big companies in general where whom you communicate to, how you get your ideas across. Can you push an idea through? And it's a little bit different from a startup where you're influencing the outside world, you're influencing investors, you're doing growth in a certain way. At larger companies, I think that changes. And I think at Google, you have all of those elements, but I think culturally the company is unique in certain ways. And I think there's an element of I think when I've asked different product leaders at Google over time, what is the thing that makes truly exceptional PMs over here? The answer that keeps coming back is grit. Are you able to have this idea, see it through, know when to push, and then know when exactly to pull back? I think that to me sort of matters more than anything else. I think the ability to influence people, understand how things get done, which probably sort of matter a little bit more in larger companies, are also important. But yeah, I think that, and I think a sense of, I think what makes a difference at Google is sort of respecting most things you have to do have to be done at scale, especially when you work at something like sort of search or YouTube. It's a little bit different when you're starting on something small, but I think those are the things that make Google a little bit different from let's say conventional product management, a smaller place.
I just want to relate to the part you mentioned about grit. Just with my own experience, one of the people that I saw as a mentor, and they did really well, everybody in our group used to say, hey, we need to be more data-driven. But okay, cool, we need to be more data-driven, and then moved on. This person stuck with it for a year, drove capabilities, actually got us to that, and it was their grit that really helped them excel. Everybody was saying the same thing, but they actually got that done.
I think sort of going that extra bit, I know exactly what you mean, right? There was this piece of analysis that a bunch of PMs, all of us, and I was very new in my career at that time, we were all looking at it and we said, all right, I think the data says this. And one person, she was just very she's like, no, I don't think we're there yet. And the rest of us are, it's time to go home. We said, okay, let's come back and then look at it tomorrow. She spent a couple of extra days going that little bit deeper and found this insight that ended up being the thing that mattered the most in the end. Whereas I think the rest of us, and there was it was a group of PMs looking at this problem. It was a hard problem. We kind of said okay, we think this is going to be it. But no, 100%. That going, having that determination, having that desire to go see things a little bit further, I think is critical. Actually, it's critical for PM, but honestly, it's critical for most careers at this point. I think that definitely distinguishes people.
Now, maybe like just broadening a bit and understanding, you've been through different teams at Google. Tell us more about like different teams, how maybe they differed from each other, and like what was your like journey in this transition?
I was at a couple of startups before business school. I joined Google with the idea that I'd be here a couple of years and then do something else. That was 17 and some years ago. I think I was lucky in that I'd say the first half of my career, unplanned, I went through a bunch of different teams at Google. So I was at YouTube. I worked on TV ads after that. I worked on payments in New York after that. I was the founding PM on games, first in Google Plus, and then what became Google Play Games. I was I think I was the first PM on YouTube live streaming. Then I'd say like I had like a bunch of jobs over 7-ish years. And then I moved to search where I was on search for almost different parts of search for almost 7.5 years, but I touched almost every part of it. I did UI, I did the knowledge graph, I did answers and knowledge panels. So any white box you saw on search. I was always responsible for media because I think that's an affinity I had. And then I worked on Discover. And then I think at some point when I needed something smaller, I was like, oh, let me go to YouTube Shopping, which is, a little bit earlier stage. And then, I think once I sort of tell people like the night ChatGPT came out, I was like, all right, I need to there was an inflection moment that happened if we're seeing it now, it probably happened like a couple of years ago. And it feels like an important enough change that this is what I think I should spend more time doing. And so that led me to the role I'm currently in. I think and the reason I sort of went through all of it is, I think at different points, different things drove me to each of these jobs. Some of it was accidental, frankly. Like some of it was, hey, I need to change locations, so I need to look for something new. Or another one was a mentor saying, hey, can you please go here? A lot of it was driven by interest, right? So I kept coming back to YouTube because I think I love the space. I love the creating space. I love the media space. Media was also like something I was drawn to, so it sort of kept finding me. Certain jobs find you. So I was the founding PM of Delight on Search, which included these Easter eggs and things of that sort, as well as sort of at some point included Google Doodles. And it was literally a job where my manager at the time said, this is not necessarily career positive, but you will sort of do it anyway and you like it, so you should just take it. And so I think it's those kinds of things that I've really enjoyed. And so I think a lot of it is to answer your question, each job stresses a different skill. And I think in some cases, each job sort of gets a certain passion sort of in you, sort of like it sort of ignites something. And I've always looked for those, right? So I think some people are much more like, hey, I want this job because it'll help my career in this way. They're very practical about it. I think for me, it's really important to find that one thing that'll get me super excited to wake up and go to work every day. And so I sort of optimize for that quite a bit. I optimize for people. I think over time, I've learned to optimize for people, like who am I going to be around and what will they teach me? But each of these jobs was a different challenge. For a while, like I wanted to sort of, on Search organically, I just started managing more people, managing managers. And sometimes you want to do that, sometimes you want to go smaller. And so at different points in your career, you want to experience all of these different things. And obviously in the time, I remember when I joined Google, which was 17 years ago, I thought, oh man, this company is way too big. And Google has obviously grown dramatically in that time. And so I think that affects how you sort of look at things, sort of the way search is run is very different from the way YouTube is run. And you learn a lot from leaders in these places. Like how do they make decisions? How do they think about what's important? How do they sort of how do they articulate strategy, share it, all of that stuff.
What you kept saying over and over was passion. It's like what feels right as the next role for you. Safe to say like that was the guiding light for the different missions you took on?
I think for me it is. I think different people are drawn by different things. For me, like that is pretty important. And as I manage people, there are lots of people that are very practical about what they want to do, and they're like, okay, will this job get me promoted fast enough? Is this in a space that is exciting overall, right? Like, or hot? And I think they're all, by the way, a lot of them were all of them were pretty successful in their jobs, even if you're driven in that way. For me, I think I feel like we spend a lot of time at work and put in a lot of effort. You have to find something, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be the domain each time. Sometimes it can be the people, sometimes it can be the mission of the company. But you need to find something that gives you purpose, that gets you excited in the morning. And for me, especially early in my career, I think the domain was a large part of it, right? So I was very excited to go to YouTube. I was very excited to go work on a TV ads product because I love the media space. And so each of these sort of, like, domain has been a biggest excitement. Understanding and having empathy for the people that are going to use the thing. It's a lot easier if you already have empathy for that domain, right? The sort of, if your job as a PM is to have empathy for the customer, but you already love it and you wake up thinking about it, I think that makes the job that much easier.
Let's continue on this one. You mentioned, hey, going from PM to managing people and whatnot. Like, if you broadly think of product management, group PM, like sort of director roles that you've held, how have the roles changed?
I think scale sort of goes through it, right? Like the traditional cycle of, like, PM, senior PM, group PM, director, it's all, I have this long email that I write to people that I start to manage and say, like, what is the role of a manager at Google? Where in general, we want people that are extremely independent, are driven. And so you sort of are in this, half of it, I think, is coaching, which is how do I help you get better at your job? I think part of it is like removing roadblocks for you without you knowing, which is, I think, another big part of the job. And the third is sort of setting up a framework for, am I giving this person opportunities, and am I giving my team opportunities? Am I creating more opportunity for everyone? Are we positioned the right way? How does the thing that we're doing fit into everything else? So the job changes from, what I think of as like true product management, right? Like extreme empathy for the customer, extreme empathy for the problem, strategy, etc. And my general view has been, I always need to sort of do both, right? Like, so you're doing all this manager stuff, you're doing all these things, but you also need to go deep. And so there's always, I remember there was, I'd been sort of on search for a couple of years, and someone who reported to someone that reported to me came up one day, and I was writing a PRD. He's like, oh, you can do that? And I was like, holy crap, these people haven't seen the fact that I write this stuff. I need to do more of it. And so I think there are things that you do as, I'd say, like, at least the way I have found happiness in my career is to add to it, but also keep doing the core work. So like, play this role of coach, play this role of organizational blocker, play the person that like goes and finds opportunities for your team, understands how it fits in the larger picture, how it matters to Google, communicates that up to senior leadership. All of those sort of start to matter a lot as well. I'd say, and the balance is, the volume on that goes up dramatically higher as you go from like senior to group to director. And so I think that's the big difference.
Say more about that. When you said the volume goes up higher, what do you mean?
So you spend more time thinking about how my team fits in the bigger picture. Is the thing that our entire org is doing, does it matter to the entire company? I think, frankly, ever since I was group PM and director, like I think as much about the health of the team and the org as anything else, right? So am I meeting with, the engineering team, the engineering leader is like, are we sort of, is everyone, what is the culture like? Like, is everyone excited about the same things? So you spend a lot more time, honestly, just worrying about not just your PM team or their, the UX team and stuff. You think a lot more about the entire org, how your org fits into the bigger org. And you want to make sure everyone understands what's important, and sort of is is sort of motivated to come to work every day, right? So I would say for me, especially on, depending upon, who else is on the team, that you need to worry about that less or more. But for large parts of my career, I've worried about that as much as like the product stuff, right? You're sort of doing org management as much as like product management.
I also noticed that, you're also managing UX and UX research. When did that happen and how's that changed your job, if in any way?
So I formally started managing UX and UX research about a year and a half ago. I think, and I remember when it was going to happen, I sort of reached out to a lot of my peers that had managed UX orgs before about, hey, what's different? What should I do? I think whenever you start managing, there is utility in sort of one person managing a whole bunch of people whose mission is aligned, right? Like, because especially for cross-functional things, right, what ends up happening is if your manager is very disconnected from your day-to-day, it becomes harder. The flip side is, do you get a manager that has enough empathy for your, sort of function, and can sort of find the right, like, for example, I can coach someone on being a better PM on the specifics. I honestly can't coach someone on being a better designer. And so then you go like, okay, who can help them with that? But do I learn enough that I can tell them, hey, this is missing. This is what you need to spend more time on. And here are some people or some resources that can help you sort of learn. So I think you need to learn enough to be a good editor and appreciator of the functions. And I think being a PM or an eng leader or even a designer that like spends enough time on the other functions that you understand what good looks like in each of those functions. And then say like, okay, I understand the empathy, understand the issues that people in those functions run, right? So what are the, as a PM, like, let's say you're an eng leader, and you sort of look at PMs a certain way, sort of flipping the hat and saying, okay, what does that PM feel when he has to deal with my engineers, right? Or flipping the hat and say like, okay, if I was a PM and like a designer came to me, like, what are the issues they're having? Why am I hard to work with? I think if you do that early, then when you're in a position where you're managing, multiple functions, it becomes a lot easier because you know the empathy, like you have a sense of what are the concerns this person might have. So for me, it was more, my teams are small enough that like, I have one-on-ones with people. I understand the issues they have. I understand like the prioritization. And I think it's been fun so far. I've learned a lot from people on my team. I think, and again, I like to think I had a reasonable appreciation of these functions before. It's obviously just gone up as I've managed people in those functions.
I've seen some of your previous podcasts, and one of the topics you've spoken about often is product strategy. So really want to dig into this area because it's always ambiguous to people. Let's first talk about like bad strategy. When you think of areas where you've seen something that's been labeled as strategy, but it just does not provide value, like what are some of the common anti-patterns maybe that you've seen?
The short answer is I think most people are asked to come up with a strategy quickly and they make something up on the spot, or sort of like, hey, in the next 2 weeks, can you come up with a strategy for this thing? Which basically means what they end up doing is tying sort of a nice package or ribbon around like what they're already doing or what they were planning to do. And I think they also, then you sort of go around like, okay, what is a vision and a mission? And by the way, like I do think giving people purpose and explaining why you're doing what you're doing is important, but that cannot be your strategy, right? Like, and so sort of then there's like a mission statement and like a vision. Certain teams and people I work with love to put down principles, like they're like, okay, we're going to do this. And I think what ends up happening is a strategy document can be very inspirational and has a bunch of interesting words and buzzwords and stuff, but it does not actually tell you why you think the thing that you're doing is important. What was the hard problem you're solving? Why will you win because you're doing this differently? It doesn't articulate those things. And I think that to me is like a bug in strategy, right? It doesn't actually point out what is the hard problem and what is the bet you're making to like solve it and win with it, right? And which is ultimately to me what a good strategy is.
I love both, like sort of two different things you said. One is like you're given a task to come up with a strategy, you're given a time frame, and then people sort of do the best they can, and that's very closely aligned with what they're already doing. And then the second one seems to be a lack of insight.
It's a lack of insight, right? It's a sort of, I think that the time is a huge part of it, right? Like I think people are rushed and so they come up with stuff. And then when that happens, like they don't have this insight, and they sort of, it is easier for people that are good, especially people that are good communicators, like basically come up with a document or in some ways like a slide deck that like tells you, oh look, this is the mission, and when we do this, and by the way, I've been guilty of it, right? So I can't say like I've never done this, which is you sort of come up with something that sounds really good, and makes, you read this thing, it makes sense, but it doesn't actually address like the real problem you have at hand. And I think those are really common. I think most strategy documents I have read from outside, from friends, from other teams, like they are more likely to be bad strategy than good strategy, and it takes a lot of time and discipline to like push that. And by the way, like sometimes like even there are teams I've been on that like want to take months to write a strategy document, but still don't have a good strategy. So I think a lot of it is cultural, a lot of it is organizational. You have to be like very deliberate about, okay, no, what is the real thing you're doing? What is the hard trade-off you're making? I think those things are hard.
And in your own team, like how do you coach them through the process of coming up with a really solid strategy?
If you're a small team, it's a lot easier, right? And let's say if you're a larger team, like it's you have to find how your strategy fits into something bigger. So in a weird way, especially if you're working on a large product, you're shaping your team strategy, but you're also shaping like, sort of search or YouTube strategy. You're like, how does this fit into these things? I think at least for me, for coaching, like I ask this question, like I think this question of like, what is the hard problem? What is the bet we're making? If this thing works, will we win? And how do you define winning? Like, what is the metric? How do you know it's succeeding? And right, so ultimately the PM job is defining this good strategy, defining the metric that you're going to win, and then making sure it gets there, right? So what is your dashboard? How do you know you're winning? How does this work? So I ask these questions a lot. And then, so to me, like, reading the document, going back and forth with the PMs is sort of the way, like, I think I coach by looking at the work product and going back and forth. So at least my philosophy is don't, in general, come to your peers, come to me at least with very early thoughts rather than a finished product, right? Because if you come with like, okay, here's my strategy, and I'm reading it, I'm like, no, like, and it's a lot more demoralizing because you spend a lot of time on it. Whereas like, I go like, just share your first draft, share bullet points, and let's go back and forth. If you want to chat before, like, let's do that. That to me is a lot easier than like, some people, by the way, like every person is different. I will say this, right? So there was one person on my team for a very long time, exceptional PM. I kept saying, just write a document. Like this doesn't need to be a deck. And he was like, no, I think better with a deck. So I'm going to send you decks. But it worked for that person. And so I think one of the things as a manager is you have to adapt. It is much better in the long run if you adapt your communication, consumption, managerial style to the exceptional people on your team versus trying to have them fit what works for you. So almost every person on my team does different one-on-ones differently. There's certain things I want, but like I was like, it's your thing. And so you want to coach certain things, but you don't want to take them. You sort of want them optimizing the things that they do really, really well. And so I sort of like, all right, if you think you do better with decks, send me your decks. I will adapt.
I was just about to say that that's a very insightful perspective, because most of the time I spend coaching PMs, it's the exact opposite, where can you adapt to your manager's preference, communication style, how they like to receive information, how they like to brainstorm, and then it's a PM who's doing a lot of the adaptation.
I think that's generally smart, right? Which is, I think a good career optimization function is to say like, hey, how can I make life easier for my manager? I think I have been fortunate, not all of my career, but for a lot of my career, that I've had managers that like appreciate what I did enough that they adapted to mine, or like I could change a little bit to theirs, but they sort of understood. They were like, okay, this is fine. Like there's enough trust in the system. They trusted me to like, and they gave me the space to operate. And when they wanted certain things, we were able to like talk about it. Not all of my career, but for a lot of my career. And I think I have been fortunate in that I have not had to dramatically adapt my style for most of my managers. And to your point, like I wish I'd got this coaching. It would have been very useful in one or two cases to adapt my style, and I didn't. But as a result, I have tried. It is a lot. When I manage people, I realize that different people succeed in different ways, and so I try and look for what is the thing that like this person needs to. If this person's good at their job and their style is just different, I will adapt to it. Right? Sometimes you just need to say, no. You need to get better at X, Y, and Z. You need to get better at these things. And then every team and every company is different, right? So even within Google, I've had to coach people and say, listen, I mean, the most common thing is, PMs know the details. You want them to learn how to distill things up for management. But I was like, hey, this person is pretty different. You can tell them the details and they will want to dive deep. Whereas this person is more of an exec, like this is the way you should communicate to them. And so I think all of that is, you have to understand the environment you're in and how to succeed there. I don't spend fortunately, I knock on wood, I haven't had to spend crazy amounts of time or effort managing my manager. I think managing the org, I feel like it's a little bit different. And so I hope I also make it easier. Like I hope like my reports don't spend time managing me. Like there are enough other problems to go like solve in the world.
We've been talking about a lot of interesting topics on like your career so far and management philosophy. Let's talk about something that basically is at the forefront of most people's minds, AI and how product management is evolving there. Till now, and especially within Google, what have you seen been the biggest impact AI has already had on the role?
So maybe let's talk about now and where I think things are heading, right? Which is, I think all of us, on multiple dimensions, I think AI will change sort of PMing dramatically. The example I was giving someone was, I've been doing this job for a while, and I feel like the job in some ways has become more and more specialized, right? So which is, when I started working, I don't think, for many years, I never worked with a UX researcher. For many years, I never worked with a data scientist. Early on, like the PM job was also the technical program manager job. So you were also program managing, you were also doing this. Over time, like I feel like the job got specialized and there are more of these functions. I think AI potentially will just allow some of these things to collapse in some ways again, right? So in theory, and I think the tools are sort of there, but not there yet, where one person could like go get the insights, go do the data analysis, go sort of have some agents talk to customers and come back, build a prototype, build a mock. And so I think there are all these skill sets that, I think potentially could collapse again. I think what it enables is just people to be dramatically more sort of efficient themselves. So I think it gives even more agency to people. So I think in the long run, that's where I see all of this coming, right? Just on a day-to-day productivity thing. It also just gives you superpowers in really interesting ways, right? Which is, I think, imagine putting everything into like, Notebook LM is something that a lot of people here use. Putting it into that and like querying it and getting insights out of it. I find even, I've talked about with folks, like my brainstorming process has changed, which is I no longer sit, if I'm trying to think about, how to plan certain thing or some product insight, uh, I find I think better when I'm bouncing ideas off someone. And so I find like an LLM is a pretty good thing to bounce ideas off. And just you refine your own ideas like dramatically faster. I think then you refine like brainstorming, missing things dramatically faster. Like the thing I used to tell people was even a year and a half, 2 years ago, right? Like I felt like if I asked an LLM like, hey, give me a strategy for X, it spit out something that like, if an APM came to you, you'd be like, oh, it's not bad. And I feel like now it's at the level, if you look at something like deep research or any of these products, it's at the level where some really sophisticated PMs would struggle to come up with like the insights of that, just an LLM will spit out at you because it does a bunch of research. It's able to come up with this. So a lot of the skill shifts to being a good editor and consumer of this intelligence. So, your skills as a PM, as a professional in general, shifts to, okay, given all this insight, given all of this, what do I do with this information? What is the next thing in the chain to do? So I think a lot of PMing across products will be about being a sophisticated user of AI rather than, okay, let me do this work and do this analysis. You'll still have to do a lot of that, but like I think a lot of the thinking in the world has been done for you, and I think you have to be a consumer of this intelligence and sort of figuring out how to use it. So to me, that will be the biggest change, I think, in PMing.
I remember doing a post a while back that if you're not a power user of AI, like you're not even starting to be in this game. And like, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen almost a inclination for people to jump into the technical end and the models before becoming a power user. Don't know if you've seen any patterns like that.
Whenever there's a new technology, right, like there's excitement. And so people want to understand what's going on. So I think that they should do that. But I think to your point, that's separate from just using these tools really well. I think the hard part is some of these tools are still evolving, right? So I remember a year ago, I had to give this presentation on AI and I was like, hey, maybe I should set myself the goal of like use AI to make this presentation, right? To sort of prove the thing. It just took so long and was so painful. I was like, this is a horrible idea. Like, and for years, I've sort of felt like, not for years, but I'd say for a year, I've been like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could? I gave a presentation recently where I said, okay, all my slides will be they're going to be just images. So they're going to be generated by AI. They mostly worked, but it was like painful on like a couple of slides, right? But I remember saying like, hey, you should be able to do this for mocks and prototypes. And the reality is like, the tooling's not quite there and you have to spend a lot of time getting the tooling to work. And some people are better at it than others. Like, and so I think the tools will just keep getting better for professionals. But I think to your point, like you need to start using all of these now. And in some cases you might conclude like, okay, I'm a power user, but it still takes too long and it's too painful. In other cases, you're like, okay, this got dramatically better. And I'm finding it's a mix of these things. But yeah, I 100% agree. Like understanding the tools that are available, understanding what's capable now. The example actually I gave someone was, imagine just being the person that started using, computers or Excel before anyone else. And that you were like, there was some work to be done, but you had this thing and were turning it around in like, a couple of hours where someone else was spending days on it. Think of the advantage you would have. That's where we should be with this, right? For the little things and the small things. Everything from just like writing an email to like writing a draft and like even getting insights about yourself, right? Which is I send this very long email to the entire org. I put this all in Notebook LM, and like the thing I was not expecting is it started having insights about me and my like what I do well and what I do badly. And so then I started asking, is like, hey, what could Satyajeet do better? And it spit out like 5 things. And I was like, okay, all these things are true. It's very remarkable that like a sequence of like 10 emails told that, like the LLM figured that out. And so I think there are things about insights that you will get about your product, about what's happening, that these things will give you. But I think there's a lot of work to be done to make sure, this intelligence has the data, has the systems. And I think depending upon the company you're in, depending on the tools that you have access to, this will be easier or harder, right? Like I have friends that are at certain companies where they're like, yeah, all the meetings are recorded. The AI looks at them and summarizes them for us, so we don't go to the meetings. And then like we're able to ask, hey, what did this person say? What did that person say? That's just a huge time saving. We don't have that culture at Google, but I think I'm increasingly seeing people more and more like, can you summarize the meeting and send it to me? And so I do think there's a lot of that you're seeing in the system. But, sorry, that was a meandering answer. But I do think no matter what profession you're in, AI will sort of dramatically change, the way it's done. I think PMing, it could be an incredibly empowering tool for PMs. But I think if you're a narrow PM, like I think if you're sort of very focused on, look, I'm the person that does analysis really well, and the analysis is what drives all my product decisions. Now all of a sudden, like everyone is going to be able to do that analysis because the AI is going to do better analysis than you could, right? So I think this question of like, how do I evolve? What do I do differently? Is something that you have to sort of figure out.
With AI changing, with today's job market, like what are things you think PM should really be looking at or trying to get better at to do really well in their careers?
Let me put it this way, right? The superpower of PMs is ultimately like empathy, right? Empathy for the customer, that leads to the insight, empathy for other people, so understanding influence and how to get things done. I think that to me is still, and then sort of this nature of like grit, like can you push enough? I think some people call it agency. Some people, I had managers use the word grit, so that's what I use. But I think this notion of like, that stays the same. I think some of the tools change, right? Which is, I think this idea of like, so to me, like, I think this notion of now you are no longer like constrained by, oh, I need a data scientist. Like figure out, okay, how can I do some of this myself, right? I think the bar for those things has dropped dramatically. So I think I feel like the 8 PMs can take even more agency now, right? Like you can push even more going forward. So I think that mindset shift is really important. I think another thing that's going to happen is, this is every platform change does this, right? So desktop, mobile, all of these things. We're in the middle of a significant platform change, which means there's opportunity. Right. But I think right now it's super fuzzy. Right now, everyone is sprinkling an LLM on top of their product. And, there's generally like a chat thing that bubbles up somewhere. It's fine. It's definitely efficient. But I think there's going to be something that is better. Right. So I think thinking through what that means for, if you're an enterprise, what does that mean? If you're building a consumer product, what does that mean? If you're building hardware, what does that mean? I think that to me is like always interesting. And I think that has significant opportunity. But on a day-to-day basis, I think sort of figuring out how can you do even more using like this bottled up intelligence that you're going to have? How can you be a good editor, be a good consumer, be a good orchestrator of this yourself? I think that to me is sort of the most interesting thing you can sort of focus on as a PM going forward.
Thank you so much, Satyajeet, for appearing on the podcast.
This was fun. Thanks for having me on.
And then last but not least, like if people want to get in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best way to reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Those are good places to be.
Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.